So,
Yeah.
You want to talk about the Baseball Hall of Fame?
Yeah. Okay. So, guys, if you want to hear something funny, the Dan Le Batard show from, I guess it was Thursday. Yeah. They had on first. Okay, actually, first.
Well, no,
They had David Sampson on.
Okay, so let's hold on. Let's just set this up. So this week they voted on the Major League Baseball. They voted, the Hall of Fame voting came out for this year, and David Ortiz got in pretty close, but he managed to get over the 75%. And Bonds, Clemens, and Curt Schilling, they did not get in, and this is their last year on the regular ballot. It now goes to a Veterans Committee who can still vote them in later, but it doesn't seem very likely that that's going to happen. So obviously, whenever this comes up every year, we have to talk about why they didn't vote for steroids and guys who we think took steroids and all of that, and it becomes a huge debate. So go ahead.
Yeah. So first, I'm listening to Le Batard. So they had David Sampson on, who was a former front office guy
He was the president of the Florida Marlins before they sold the team. So basically, David Sampson. Not a favorite of mine. The Marlins basically pulled a bait and switch on us. They convinced the county and the city to give them $150 million to help to build the new stadium. They built the new stadium. They signed a bunch of free agents. Halfway through the first year of the stadium, they traded everybody, and then sold the team for $2 billion or whatever it is. So,
yeah, they hoodwinked everybody. Yeah, well, he was ripping Barry Bonds, and he's just like, he's not a good guy, and because Barry Bonds was a hitting coach for the Marlins at one point, and he was just saying it was this lame ass attempt to try to get back into baseball, to maybe try to get into the Hall of Fame. So he was really ripping Bonds, and then they had like a this is kind of unrelated, but it was just the Thursday episode of the Le Batard show was really funny. Or maybe wait, was it Thursday? Yeah, it was Thursday. And they had on, how Stugotz does his weekend observations,
correct?
Right? They had a comedy writer who's written some different shows on there, and he did January observations about the Dan Le Batard show.
Oh yeah, Mike Schur. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I heard that.
He did the one about he said, boy, it was really great to hear David Sampson the other day defending coaches hitting players. Rarely do you hear the pro side of that argument, which is it's okay for coaches to hit their players.
Yeah, so just anybody wants to check this out, Le Batard and Friends on YouTube. They put everything on there so you can see.
Yeah, and he was saying what was it? Mike Schur was going David Sampson and Woody Hayes documentary, Collision Course.
Yeah, so, but the hitting the players, that's talking about Bruce Arians, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So in the game, the Tampa Bay and Los Angeles Rams game last weekend, there was a play where one of the Bucks players, I guess he hit a guy late or something, and Bruce Arians, the coach, ran out onto the field and smacked the guy on his helmet. And everybody's like, "Oh, you can't hit players," and it's like he didn't really hit a player. So what did?
But anyway, we got to get back to the Hall of Fame thing. So yeah, David Sampson was talking about that, and then they had Adnan Virk on, and Adnan Virk used to work at ESPN. He's a big baseball fan. And so they start off the segment, and Dan Le Batard's like, "Do you find it kind of odd that people were really outraged when Bonds and Clemens were playing that they were cheating and they were using performance-enhancing drugs, and there was all this outrage, and now it's like 20 years later or whatever, and everybody's upset every year when they don't get into the playoffs, and there's all this outrage." It's like, well, they're not getting in because of the outrage that you guys had when they were playing, because you were unhappy that they were cheating. So now you're outraged on the other end of the spectrum. Like, I don't get it, And then they were talking about the Hall of Fame voting, and they were kind of critical of some of it. And Adnan Virk was like, "Yeah, I kind of get some of that." Like, he goes, "One time I was talking to a Hall of Fame voter, and he's like, he had BJ Suroff on his ballot." former player on the Brewers, and he goes, look, I like the Brew Crew. That's fine. But why do you have him on your ballot? He goes, well, we're from the same small town. And I told him that if I ever got a Hall of Fame vote, I'd put him on there. Like, what the fuck? What the hell are we doing? So yeah, and then they were talking about the whole thing. It's like, no one, Bonds and Clemens are pariahs, right? But Alex Rodriguez, oh no, he's doing games now. Everybody loves him. What the? Why does this make any sense? And then they put David Ortiz in the Hall of Fame. It's like, well, okay.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. Like Dan Le Batard was saying that, if Barry Bonds had smiled more like David Ortiz does, he probably gets in.
Let's be fair. David Ortiz is he's a character. He's likable. He's got a nickname, and they make fun of him on Saturday Night Live, but in like a good-natured way, and it's just, I don't know. Look, if Clemens and Curt Schilling and Bonds want to get into the Hall of Fame, they might just want to travel down to the Dominican Republic and get shot and recover, and then they'll probably get into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, it's not as simple as, they took steroids or they didn't. No, the Hall of Fame voters pick and choose who they like and who they don't like. Jim Rice for the Red Sox should have gotten in for years and couldn't get in because the media didn't like the way that he talked to him. Okay, Curt Schilling has nothing to do with steroids. This is about, personal views about, politics or whatever. It has nothing to do with sports. It's so insane. And first of all, I mean, my argument is Curt Schilling should have been in, like he's been on the ballot 10 years now. He should have been in on the first or second ballot. So so the worst part is that, and I see your point about, we're outraged about, first of all, people aren't really outraged about it. Like we really don't.
This is kind of fake outrage.
They don't really care that much. But second of all, no, we care that these sports writers are basically act like they're taking it into their hands about, what they should do. And so, this is how it is. Like they didn't put anybody in last year. There's not going to be anybody in next year. They put Ortiz. I mean, they're basically like they're down to the last guy they could put in where they feel confident about it. So my argument is just put these people in. So there was a funny thing. I was listening to Bob Costas was on the Rich Eisen show the other day, so I was listening to the segment, and he basically gave his argument as to why these guys aren't in. I mean, he basically was saying let's put them all in. Like he's like I don't we don't have any direction from the Hall of Fame as to how to vote for these guys. Major League Baseball is not involved in it. The Hall of Fame is a separate entity. Yeah. So why are we trying to parse out who did what? There's no way to know.
Well, the problem you run into when you start trying to parse that out is you end up looking hypocritical. Because you're essentially set like what David Ortiz got. Like they said, he tested. How did it come out with him? I'm trying to remember.
So they did a survey test in 2003. To see what percentage of players would come up positive, so then they could decide what kind of testing program, whether they were going to introduce mandatory testing. And so he tested we were not supposed to find out the results. Of course, that worked really well. So he tested the story is that he tested positive, but there were also a whole bunch of false positives in that survey. So we don't really it basically amounts to we don't really know. Like we don't really know. We think he probably failed it, but as Bob Costas said, a lot of David Ortiz's career was in a time where they tested and he never tested positive. Right? It's different than like Manny Ramirez or Alex Rodriguez. They tested positive more than once. So it changes from, Barry Bonds, Mark McGwire, those guys, they played where there was no testing or minimal testing, right at the end of their careers. So it does change the debate a little bit. But I thought this was really funny. So he was saying Bob Costas was on the MLB network earlier that week. And he was like, And as we sit here, Pete Rose is still not in the Hall of Fame on the MLB Network, presented by DraftKings.
Yeah.
So we've embraced gambling in sports. It's perfectly fine. Everybody and their mother is sponsored by DraftKings and what's the other one? DraftKings and FanDuel, right? And the ads, like if you listen to podcasts, their ads are ridiculously long. It takes them 2 or 3 minutes to read everything because they have to read what state, what hotline you can call if you're addicted to gambling. So they're funding all this stuff. Meanwhile, we can't put Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Even though he bet after his playing career. So, the whole thing is a shit show.
On some level, I understand. I can see where people will be like, do we really want to honor Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds? Because they're douchebags. They were douchebags about the whole thing. They were totally like unapologetic. McGuire's never really apologized, but he wasn't really defiant about it. So I do kind of get the idea, well, we don't want to honor this guy. We don't want to give this guy a platform, whatever. I sort of understand that, but at the same time, again, it just becomes hypocritical because it's like, what's the standard? Like if you put one guy in and you leave somebody else out, then it's like, well, why not put that guy in? Like it just becomes, and the thing is, it's like, guys, we got to understand something. The writers didn't criticize this shit enough when it was going on in the 90s. Like they just let the shit happen. I think maybe that's part of the reason too. They're like, we let this go on, so we're not going to now, it's like, well, no, it's like, no, you let this go on. And the players are so like, remember that quote from, what was it? Faye Vincent. He's like, I think the players will deal with this like in the late 80s, something about it. Yeah. It's like, you could like the players and the owners, you guys let this shit happen. So it's just kind of, baseball's not a sport where you report your own faults like golf or something, so, you guys kind of let this go on. So I don't see why now all of a sudden we're going to be really high and mighty about it. It's like, yeah, did they cheat? Yeah. But you could argue people were cheating before that. I mean, what's his name?
Gaylord Perry.
The sticker guy. Gaylord Perry.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he was cheating. He's honest about it. He's in the Hall of Fame. So it's just kind of one of those things. And it's like, I forget who brought this up. Dan Patrick. I don't know who he was talking to. The Houston Astros cheating thing. You're gonna put, if any of those guys end up with really decent careers where you consider them Hall of Famers, you're gonna put them in? Because to me, that's almost worse. I mean, that was straight up organized cheating, and they ended up winning the World Series. Like, I would almost argue I'd not put them in over some of these steroid guys.
Yeah, they've kind of screwed themselves. I mean, what they did was they shortened the amount of time you're on the ballot, so you only get 10 years now instead of 15. So these guys are probably not – we're not going to be talking about this very long. But, I don't – baseball kind of made their bed. They kind of put themselves in the situation. But I was thinking about this. Bob Costas suggested, well, let's put Barry Bonds in, but we'll put something on his Hall of Fame plaque that says, possible suspicion of steroid use, blah, 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 back in this era when there was no testing or whatever. And I thought about it. I'm like, so let me get this straight. You're going to put Clemens and Bonds in the Hall of Fame, and then you're going to put something on their plaque that basically nullifies their entire career? You think they're going to accept that? Like,
yeah, no.
Like,
it brings it back to the whole thing. Well, who do you put in and who do you take out? Right. Who do you put that on and who do you not put it on?
Right.
So, like,
yeah, exactly. Like you can't. There's no winning this situation. So it's like I like I said, I would put everybody. I'd put them in. You either put them in or don't put them in. But you can't like toe the line and try to do that. Like Clemens,
you can't please everybody.
Clemens,
and let's be honest here. Let's remember, if you looked at the numbers, Bonds got like 66% of the vote, and Clemens got like 65%. So it's not like the entire writers were all against it. There were a pretty significant chunk that were in favor of it, but it just didn't meet the 70. It didn't get over the 75%. So. Yeah, and like Tim Kirkjian was on Le Batard, and he was talking about. He said he voted for Bonds and Clemens and Schilling. He made the point that like you could argue with Schilling, like maybe was his career totally Hall of Fame worthy? Like you can kind of say it's maybe borderline, but you know.
Yeah, it's the saddest part is that about this whole thing, as I said to you, was this is as interesting as baseball gets.
Yes.
When
Yep.
we're arguing about the Hall of Fame, they're in a labor situation. Nobody cares. Like
Yep.
they're on or they're in a lockout or a strike or whatever you want to call it. Like the players and owners can't agree on anything. No one cares. It's really unbelievable. Like when I grew up, I mean, baseball was a huge deal, and now the only time we talk about it is guys who cheated getting into the Hall of Fame.
Stuff, or there's some sort of story like this. Yeah. You know.
Yeah. So
yeah, it just kind of is. It just kind of is what it is, and people are, I guess, I do find it kind of interesting that people say, well, I'm retroactively pissed off about the 90s because, now I know that they were all cheating. It's like, I think that's kind of a ridiculous argument. Like I remember watching in 98 when McGwire and Sosa were hitting all those home runs. That was fun. I'm not going to say it wasn't fun. I mean, because I know they were cheating, I'm not going to say it wasn't fun. Like, come on, it just was what it was. They let it happen. So, what are you going to do? And it is really funny to me that, again, the writers, they're all pissed. Some of them are all pissed off about it. And it's like, where the hell was this during the 90s? Like, it was pretty blatantly obvious that these guys were getting cartoonishly big, and, very little was said about it. So,
yeah, at a certain point, you got to let it go.
Yeah.